Welcome to the Juniper podcast, where we chat with the most fascinating people in the pet space and dive into ways to keep our pets happy, healthy, and enriched. If you're a little obsessed with your pets like we are, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Juniper podcast. Super excited about today's episode. We're here with Collin Armstrong, who lives in Austin, Texas, runs a local SEO agency for service businesses called Mostro, as well as building a newsletter about the business of dogs called the Dogonomist. So that's what we really want to talk to him about here today. He has two dogs. One is a pit pug mix named Mapo and a pug named Toast. And their faces are the only tattoos that he has. So that in itself is a story that we want to get. So I guess, Collin, can you tell us a little bit about your life with dogs, how you got into loving animals, how you ended up with these tattoos?
Yeah. I started off, I've had dogs my entire life, except for my stint in New York, where I didn't. And I tried to be a foster, and I swear it was harder than like an admissions process for like an Ivy League school. Like I even had a backyard and still got ghosted and everything, which is like unheard of in New York. But anyways, all that to say, I've had dogs my whole life. They've been super special. It's kind of one of the things that's fascinated me forever is like how we as humans have brought in a wild creature into the home to create this loyal, unconditional love and this bond. And then in a relatively short amount of time, we made so many different copies of them for like looks, jobs, companionship. Like it's just fascinating. So I used to study all the breeds because it just absolutely fascinated me. Like, why is a dachshund that shape? Oh, it used to like be bred for hunting badgers and blah, blah, blah. It's just many things like that really fascinated me. So yeah, it was just like a huge love for the animal, for the relationship. It's again, like the domestication of it, like this specific animal in particular was super special. And so, it's a bond that I've really come to appreciate. Not only as a child, it was amazing coming home from school, having a bad day, didn't want to talk to mom, didn't want to like discuss things. It just a wagging tail and like rolling around on the floor with my dog was amazing. And now as an adult, it's even more so important for that, relationship outside of human companionship to have a dog that it doesn't matter what you did, what you said, how you acted, it's there for you. And so it's really just been like exploring that relationship, helping humans bond with dogs more, and helping people create businesses and stuff to better service those relationships and ultimately let this relationship continue to flourish for hundreds of years. Very long-winded answer, but
No, you're definitely speaking our language. And I'm like, I already know Haley and I could probably go off and make a podcast episode about all of the things you just talked about, because we feel such strong emotional connections to our dogs. And I think anybody who ends up building some kind of business in this space starts really with the love of their dogs. So can you tell us a little bit about Dogonomist, what it is, how people can sign up for it, and just a little bit about like how you even got that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dogonomist I wanted to build something that covered the economy of dogs, as I call it. So essentially, I was always fascinated. I've been a small business owner and operator or worked for startups in the past. I've never been a big corporate person, and I've always wanted to learn about these interesting businesses in very specific niches. And in this case, like the dog space. And I felt like everything I was seeing was there's a lot of stuff in the industry that talks about like manufacturing and like pet food industry. There's all these like very corporate or industry focused things, but nothing that's really kind of like, I would say we're our realm where it's like we have a general interest, we're business minded, we care to follow something we have a passion about, in this case, which is dogs. And so I just felt like that was, like many things start to fill a void. And I wanted to talk about the business and some of the interesting findings and stuff like that in the space. And so I also felt like there was, when you find these businesses, you're like, oh, this business is amazing. How does it work so well? Like, I can't believe that. Well, behind that are some like trends or some insights, some data that's usually driving the success behind that. And so that was kind of why I created it. And I was wanting to explore those stories a bit more. And I actually have a really interesting one and an update about a story I wrote about that I want to touch on. Also, with that being said, like you could just go to dogonomist.com, sign up. It's for free. I used to do it weekly with my partner, Alex. I've kind of changed the cadence to biweekly since I have a fresh daughter, but I will eventually be increasing that cadence again. And there's a lot of exciting things planned for 2025. So that was kind of like a short interim thing that I did just to kind of be present with a new family and stuff. But yeah, so dogonomist.com, free to subscribe. There's actually an issue coming out today. So,
well, congratulations, first of all.
thanks.
You dangled that in front of us with the story update that you said you wanted to share. So now you have to give all the details.
Yeah. So this story in particular that I'm going to tell you, or this business, is like exactly what excites me and makes me come back to wanting to continuously dig through the internet to find more stories like this. So there is this business that started, I believe, around COVID, where it was a city couple that ended up going out to Vermont, buying a farm, got about 10 golden retrievers on this farm, right? They also do maple syrup. They run a legitimate farm, but then they started doing this thing called the golden retriever experience. So basically, city folks, anybody who's lived in New York or anything in that place, like you're just dying to do an upstate trip or get, out of the city for a weekend and do something out in nature, apple picking, all that good stuff, hikes. So they cater to that market. And so basically, for like an hour or 2 hours, you could go and book a session. It's a play date with 10 golden retrievers. And they had these amazing TikTok videos where they literally drop a tailgate and they all just like pour out. And it was super incredible to watch. And I was like, I'm so fascinated by this. Like, I totally see the appeal and understand. Living in New York for about 10 years, I totally get who they're catering to. So like when I first wrote about it, I went and looked and I was just doing napkin math and I was like looking through their calendar. They had a bunch of dates available. Typically it was like 24 slots. It was like $75 a slot. And there was a lot of dates that were sold out. And so I was just doing conservative math. And I was like, okay, if we did 15 days a month, at this rate, blah, blah, blah. Basically, I came up to like 324,000 a year based on my conservative estimate on what I was seeing on their website, just running some napkin math. I actually went back to it recently. They've upped the price to $100. So from 75 to 100, they have changed the slots from 24 to 30. And they're sold out for the rest of the year, except for 2 time slots at the very end of December, which I'm sure it's because it's ice cold. And they trademarked the golden retriever experience. And it's just like, this stuff to me is so fascinating. I'm like, that is so cool and such an unconventional business. No hate on the pet food space, but it's like, it's not another pet food company. Like we have a ton of options there. And so I think it's really unique and special and just goes to show you a lot of the like diversity in this space and the crazy amounts of businesses that you can build. And again, like this is not even their full business. Like this is an experience on an existing farm. And it just was like this happen chance business that came about. And that to me was like super cool. And then going a step further, like I mentioned before, is understanding the trends and the insights as to like, why is that successful? Why did they continue to sell out? Leveraging social media, targeting the right audience, people in the city. A lot of times it's a huge commitment to own a pet. A lot of people are traveling. A lot of people are super busy. So this like checks a lot of boxes for a lot of people who have discretionary income and want to get out of the city. And Vermont's beautiful. It's like one of my favorite states. So I totally understand. And talking about those things and finding more of those kinds of opportunities, I think is like the epitome of what I'm trying to do at Dogonomist.
That one's so interesting too, because it's this example of something in the pet space that seems to be primarily targeted to people who don't even currently have pets. And I think that so much of the pet industry, it's like, you're already a pet owner, you're already a pet parent. And this really speaks to what you were saying earlier, like the connection of dogs and humans and how it is this amazing ancient bond. That's one of my personal passions. And the fact that even people who don't currently have a dog in their home can still feel and want that. And I feel like we're seeing more opportunities, for that to be possible, whether in this way or like some of the short-term fosters, although I totally hear you on that being like getting into an Ivy League. That's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. It's so interesting, the different avenues and facets in every step of non-dog ownership to dog ownership, especially as someone who's owned them their whole lives. And then I knew responsibly it didn't make sense, just my travel schedule and everything, to own a dog. So I wanted to foster. And so like fostering a lot of times can be seen as step one into the process of dog ownership, which is exactly how we've gotten both of our dogs. It's almost like a trial instead of, which I could talk about that as well. I think it's a perfect hack for people looking to rescue dogs instead of going to the shelter and picking the cutest one that you had a like amazing 10-minute interaction with. It's like you get to actually let the dog's personality come through fostering, understand them a bit more, see if it's a good lifestyle fit, then make that commitment. If not, you totally know what they're like and you can pass them on to another person. And now you also know exactly what you need from a dog, in the household for yourself. And so all that to say is there's so many steps along the way, previous to during pet dog ownership, and of course, even post, which is the worst part of it all. There's so many opportunities there, I think, to service people, with experiences or businesses.
Yeah, we have a guide that just came out called How to Get a Dog that Haley wrote and did an amazing job on, which everybody can go download on the site on juniperpet.co. I got to plug it there because fostering to adopt is one of our favorite things to recommend. But we talk about everything in the guide about like the best way to get a dog, because we realize that so many people don't even know how to go out and get a dog, or if they're going to buy a dog, how do you go buy a dog? If they're going to adopt a dog, how do you go about adopting a dog? And so we wanted to cover all of that. So that's in our guide. I'm just doing a little plug for our guide because your story really resonates with us in that way. But I also really liked you sharing the story about the golden retriever farm, or, I don't know the best way to say it, but it's really interesting too, because it's like somebody is obviously following their dreams and then figuring out how to make something out of it that's sustainable. Do you think this story about the golden retriever's secret big business is reflective of any kind of like larger trends you see as far as pet ownership, or just people? And since this, as Haley pointed out, isn't even a case of ownership, just the growing trend and popularity for people and their pets right now?
Yeah, I actually think there's a double-edged sword to that. There's another company, they just opened up in the US, I believe in like Santa Monica, somewhere in LA. It's the Pug Cafe, or Cup of Pug, I think is what it's called. They're based in London. Kind of a similar thing. You can come in, have an experience with these pugs, grab a tea, blah, blah, blah. And like that is now, I've always been like, this would be amazing in the US. And so there's like all these experiences like that too, where again, it's like this blend of people who have a dog or just want to be around dogs. But then there's also this whole other side to dog ownership and dog culture right now that I think is ruffling a lot of feathers. What I mean by that is like they've been integrated into society a lot more, but if you rummage through Twitter or other places, like you'll see a lot of people being like, there's dogs everywhere. There's dogs in my grocery stores. There are dogs in my restaurants, like blah, blah, blah. And so I think you're getting a lot of negative feedback in that. And I think there's certain cities like Austin, which are extremely, extremely dog friendly. I literally went to my dry cleaners a couple months ago and I had the dogs in the car. They saw the dogs and they're like, do your dogs want treats? I'm like, why do dry cleaners have dog treats? So there's like cities on that level. And then there's other cities where I think it's a little less, they haven't turned the curve, or maybe people aren't necessarily willing to share so much public space with dogs and dog owners and stuff. And so all that to say is like, I think there is a little bit of a fever pitch happening in some places, especially warmer climates where dogs are abundant, Texas, Florida, California, Arizona, stuff like that. I think you're seeing more of these kinds of, there are a lot of offerings and experiences like private dog parks, bars that are catered to dog owners. And then you have other people where like that starts to blend into like kind of normal institutions. And I think it rubs a lot of other people the wrong way. And it's a very gray area, but I might have got lost in my own response and trying to answer directly what you were saying, but that's what I was thinking about.
No, that's fine. I think something that I find interesting since I started Juniper is trying to learn about the pet industry in general and like finding interesting stats. And that's what I think is really interesting about Dogonomist too, is like, I had seen this one stat that's just stuck in my head as a business person. And it was around Halloween costumes for pets. And I think so that when we first started Juniper, it was like almost a $500 million industry just selling Halloween costumes to pets. And there isn't even like a clear leader in this industry. Just you can go buy Halloween costumes at a lot of different places. I was like, wow, that's interesting. And then when this Halloween rolled around, I think the number went up to something like 700 or 800 million. We're really getting close to this being just pet Halloween costumes for one day of the year being $1 billion industry on its own. That is mind-boggling to me as a business owner. And so I love learning these little weird stats about pets and what types of things are growing, because I think what it reflects on, it's obviously a funny tidbit, but it also reflects on the fact that we're seeing the humanization of pets, right? Like we want them to be part of our families, get a cute picture with them, all of that kind of stuff. Now, of course, Haley and I cover like whether you should dress up your dog. And if so, here's how to do it. And the safety around it and all of those things are important too. But the fact that's interesting to me is just that people want to behave in this way. Have you seen anything interesting like that when doing research for Dogonomist?
Yeah, I think one of the things you pointed on, I spoke with the folks over at Big Eye Agency. They've done stuff for like Moe's, pets, supplements, Zesty Paws, stuff like that. Really, really good when it comes to pet marketing. And one of the things that stood out to me that was like a total obvious thing, and it's kind of a touching on what you're talking about, is like, if we do it for ourselves and we haven't done it for pets, it's $1 billion business. And I think like we dress ourselves, we get so jazzed about Halloween. Like we love transforming ourselves, and like our pets are just an extension of what we like reflect and see ourselves as. I think like those types of businesses where it's just like, if we're doing it for ourselves, whether it's like self-treatment, massages, things of that nature, recovery, and then like doing that for the pet, I would say like the real question is like, can you find something where it doesn't make sense, or you can't see a path forward, or there isn't someone already starting to explore that? Because it's like every facet I think about, it's crazy. Like I have a friend, she has an amazing infrared company that they have like infrared mats, red light therapy masks, all this stuff, right? And one of their biggest feedbacks is like every time someone gets like the sauna wrap or like the PEMF mat, it's like their dog loves it. Sure enough, I'm looking it up and there's like infrared dog beds coming onto the market, and stuff like that. And so it's just like those types of things. I think if you think about entertainment, so if it's entertaining, Halloween costumes, very entertaining, or it's preventative, or it's this like, because we have shifted from reactive where there's like, oh, there's a lump on my dog, I should go to the vet. Like that's a problem, to being like, oh, I hope I never see a lump on my dog. Here's some supplements, or here's like this therapy, or so preventative, right? So if it's entertaining or it's a preventative measure, I think there's so many little micro facets to explore in that space that it feels never ending. Like I swear it's like you just unearth something and someone might have been doing it for 20 years and it's just word of mouth. And somehow you stumble upon it like on a weird Reddit forum or, something like that, but they're hard to find. So that's like kind of the fun part is finding more of those. But yeah, it's super interesting to see how everything we do for ourselves, we're eventually, if not have already started to do for our pets.
Are you seeing trends with how often and how much people are willing to spend on dog training as well?
That one's super interesting. Dog training is, I think this is the most outside of pet food, because that one is like pet food. You go somewhere, like you ask someone about like, oh, like I think about raw, like someone will be like, it's amazing, you should do it. And then the other person will be like, you're going to kill your dog. Like
precisely.
It's just so, and training is honestly the same. And I think training is way more complex than feeding. Feeding, there's like biomarkers, there's genetics, there's a lot of things. There's also environment. Like you just have more data points to go off of. But like with training, it is so complex and nuanced where it's like, okay, my dog, especially if you're rescuing, it's like my dog has some behavioral issues. I don't really know a lot about obedience, or I don't have the time. I have roommates in my house, or it's a house full of men, or it's a house full of women, or there's other dogs, or there's a kitten, there's exotic animals. Like, so you have all these variables, right? And I think I think like in terms of trends, I definitely see people seeking more professional help. I think it's really hard because you're getting a lot of people that are burned, or like the barrier, I wouldn't say the barrier to entry is super low, but it's also not like super high. And there's just like, it's just like with a lot of these kind of services, like going to a chiropractor, right? You could get someone who kind of just skirted by and cracks your back a few times and maybe does some damage long term, or you find someone who really honestly helps you live a better life. And so it is like, unfortunately, this gray area where you have more dog owners, especially from the pandemic, and a lot of them have behavioral issues going back to work. There's separation anxiety. That's a big one if you're not working remotely. So there is a lot of leaning on that. I think some people are finding a tough way to be like, oh, like positive reinforcement, is really, really popular. It also takes a lot of patience. It also takes a lot of human training, to be able to understand what that means and how to use that effectively and properly. And so I think those like schools of thoughts and stuff have really segregated dog ownership, and people get very, very heated about my way is the right way. And I think it's just like there's too many variables. And I honestly don't know the best solution for how to navigate this moving forward, besides like having ample discussion and like maybe having people from both sides like have an open dialogue and not get heated. That way it's like people can have a better understanding, because right now it feels very political. You're on this side or this side.
It's like we've never had more access to information, but we've never been less able to digest and process the information and get the right information. And so that's one of our goals at Juniper with our content, is really like Haley and I always talk about nuance, and like you can Google, how do I do XYZ with my dog? But it's going to vary based on your dog or cat, all these decisions that you make for them. And so, yes, there's a ton of information out there, but like, is it good, trusted information? And I think that's going to continue to grow and become even more needed. And we're focused on it in the pet space, but I think it's kind of needed everywhere now. It's like you never had more people you could follow on social media to learn about pets, but like we really want to build into being a trusted space for that. And so I think we do see that problem, and that is a real problem that people struggle with, looking for really good information that they can trust. And then also trusting themselves, right? Like giving them the ability to know, like, you'll know what's right for your dog and here's how you'll know. That kind of thing I think is really important. Here at Juniper, we make content for your favorite pet brands. We're 100% women owned and operated, and you can hire us to create your articles, blogs, videos, email marketing campaigns, lead generation guides, and more. Visit us at www.juniperpet.co to learn more. Thanks for listening. Something I was wondering about for your work with Dogonomist is around like, do you have any funny or really surprising stats or data points that you came across in writing this newsletter where you were just like, this is so counterintuitive to what I would have thought?
Yeah, I think one of the stickiest ones to me was that there's been over 500,000 pets, primarily dogs, that have gotten nudicles. And I don't know if you know what nudicles are. They're fake testicles. This guy in the 90s has made a patent around fake testicles for dogs. And it was just mind-blowing to me, still going on, mind-blowing to me that this is a thing that people do. And it goes to show you it's not really for the dog. It is for the dog owner. It is for this peace of mind. You look intact, that whole thing. But, hormonally, biologically, it is not shaping or shifting anything different for the dog. And that to me is like, it brings up a lot of ethics, right? There's a lot of ethical issues. Like they claim that there's never been a single issue since they've been starting these procedures, like medically speaking. It does feel like a vanity thing, right? Where you're kind of like, it's a foreign object, like even though it's safe and approved or whatever, it's a foreign object. It's kind of like a vanity thing for that dog owner to feel more at ease or peace that they didn't, just do that process for their dog. And so I think there's some interesting underlying themes there that can be pulled from the way dog owners prioritize or view things. And it goes back again, like, it's so funny. All of this stuff is so cyclical. Like it just goes back to like stuff being like a direct reflection of you. So it's like whether you're dressing your dog or doing something very, superficial like that, or that's my opinion. I feel like it's superficial to do something like that. I think that's very indicative of where things will probably continue to go as dog ownership becomes even greater globally. I think some other interesting stats, I think one is there's rescues, right? Rescue dogs. Sometimes they're full breed, sometimes they're mutts. But like looking at AKC and looking at dog breeds, because that's how most people understand the dog world, is through these breeds that are popular. The Labrador has held the title up until 2 years ago of like most popular dog breed for 31 years. If you look at the last 2 years, which has been the French Bulldog, has superseded that. But if you look all the way, I think it's back to like 2016 or 2017, the top 5 list hasn't changed. And I think it's super interesting. I like this list because I think it gives you a really good snapshot. Even if you're rescuing, it gives you a snapshot of where a lot of people place emphasis on dog ownership. So it's like, it's a good representation. I think it's like the Lab, the German Shepherd, French Bulldog, Bulldog. These are archetypes of people. Bulldog to French Bulldog, Bulldog. So you have like these people who typically get into ownership either based on like appearance, right? So it's like this dog looks cute or cool or whatever. It's the epitome of like an American dog, which I think the Lab is. I think like you start to get into like you start understanding like those kind of stats, those kind of things, I think are just really good general ideas of what's happening with dog ownership and how people are seeing things. And then you can trickle down into more interesting kind of funny things. So like talking about the Labs, right? There was a study done where they followed, I think it was like Market Watch, did a study on the average cost of the lifetime of a Labrador, right? And by state. And so they did all kinds of things like what's your vaccines? What's your, vet visits? Let's assume you have 3 emergencies. Let's assume the dog lives to 11 years old. Let's assume it eats 30 pounds of dog food a month. All these factors, right? And I think this is it's not necessarily funny, but I think it's funny to think about that a lot of people haven't thought about, like, what is this dog going to cost me over its lifetime? And to see like in California, where it's like, I think it's California and the Northeast are typically the most expensive places to own dogs, regardless of breed, is like, you're talking like 35,000 and in some cases up to like 55,000. If that dog lives longer or you go for, experiences, or like that's not even considering travel, like if you fly with your dog or you take the extra road trip across the country because you can't fly with your dog. Like there's so many other considerations of that. And so I think that is something I think that is interesting that I've anecdotally looked at as well, where I've just been like going up to a dog owner and being like, how much do you spend a month on your dog? I don't know. How much do you spend on food a month? Well, maybe I know that. Well, how much is that equal to a year? Okay, I'm not sure. So like there's this gap, right? I think just these kind of statistics really inform you. If you start critically thinking about them, it really informs you about some of the problems that are being perpetuated in the space. And so when you look again, let's take some of those numbers in mind, 35, 55,000, right? Let's look at those other breeds in that list that are very much have altered or changed over the last 100 years. So the French Bulldog and the Bulldog, which another interesting stat is like, I believe over 80% of Bulldog births are cesarean section, which is like due to the big heads now, narrow pelvis, things like that, it's terrible. But like, if you look at those dog breeds, right, they have gotten more wrinkly, more snub-nosed, unhealthy, right? But it's all for this aesthetic appeal, all for what sells, all for what drives. And many of the people that buy those dogs, there's so many rescues, especially in Austin. Pug Rescue, one of the largest rescues. Austin Bulldog Rescue, huge. Takes in from all over the state. And Texas is the largest of all stray dogs. Of all states, like that has the most rescues, dogs for adoption, Texas is by far the largest. And so you have all these breeds that are like super cute, but people do not understand the cost. French Bulldogs also a lot of times need their nasal passages widened. It's a couple $1,000 surgery. Your dog can't breathe. There's all these things that people don't look into. And I think that education and that statistic of just understanding what this is going to cost you over the lifetime. It's almost like I wish there was like a pop-up that's like, are you sure you want to get this puppy today? Like the first year is going to cost you X amount of dollars. Are you sure? Like, I just think there's like some form of that education if that could happen. And granted, some people would be like, oh, I'll figure it out. Whatever. Yeah, it's cool. It's so cute. I want to take him home. I think there's some form of that. But I think if people really understood, what kind of hardship that could bring on a month-to-month basis or even an annual basis, I think a lot of people will reconsider dog ownership or what kind of dog breed they choose. And I think it would help some of these other dog breeds, have a chance at not facing extinction. A lot of your brachycephalic dogs, your pugs, your bulldogs, your shih tzus, things like that are facing potential extinction, in the next 100 years if things continue down that path.
And there's so much nuance in all of these topics. I have like 50 things that you have said that I want to respond to in this conversation because there's just so much good thought. Like, the training stuff, I started my platform as a dog training blog, like strictly that when you talked about the loud sides there and all of that, that really hits home for me. That ties in so well to dogs in public. And like, if we were choosing pets who were a better fit for us and our typical environment, and we were investing in training, I think some of the issues we see with access to public spaces could be mitigated because the dogs in those spaces would be suited to handle them and respectful to other visitors. And that nuance also ties into the breed discussion that you just brought up. That's a huge point and can be so controversial because we have continued to extremify these dog breeds. And like you said, so much of it is just for aesthetics. We love to talk about the traditional jobs that dogs had. But when you look at the evolution of a lot of these breeds, we can see that we've made many choices purely for, I think you said earlier that we often see our pets as sort of an extension of us. And I think we see that a lot with like some of the identification strongly with the aesthetics of a particular breed. But it's hard to get those standards to change. And you get into the definition of like, what is ethical breeding and all of these things. So I really just love like having some of the data points to look at a little bit more objectively and just say like, hey, the Dogonomist looks at what is happening in the space, sans a lot of the value judgments, take a step back, like look at it. And what you said, think critically about how does that apply? Like what things do we actually want to change? What different trends might we want to see? But there's just so much like as it becomes a bigger space and as we get more invested in it, that's such a wonderful thing. And it also carries a lot of these problems with it as we're more invested.
Yeah, there's also so much to go off of that. Like, there's something I learned about a long time ago is like, there is a movement too, because like, I think when you talk about specific breeds, and I think this is very, very interesting. Like if you go look at, University of Georgia, that's where my wife went. If you go look at their very first mascot, their very first UGA from like the 50s, and you go look at the one now, oh my God, it's like a picture is worth more than 1,000 words in that case. Like you just seen what has happened over time. And so I think like this idea of like people shouldn't get these dogs or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, that's going to happen. Like they're going to stay around. Right. And there's like, how can we change this? We have to be realistic and pragmatic about this. Right. And so it's like those dog breeds have been popular for so long. There's a lot of this education around like, how can we change that? And so there are people like, there's a big movement. I remember in college, I used to be so fascinated with old English bulldogs, old with an E, where it was this idea of like having that nose protrude, still having the muscular build, being athletic, getting rid and coming back to what it used to be. And there's like, if you look up trends and searches, like especially on TikTok, like I've seen like old pugs, like or historic pugs or ancient pugs. And it's like all these people talking about how pugs used to have a longer so I think people are waking up and realizing that there's like interest in like, how do we fix this? Because this is a problem. And that was I've never owned a pug before until this pug now. I only got involved with Austin Pug Rescue because of the pit mix that I saw and came across. I love pit mixes. I think they're super, super special, also misrepresented. But I got involved in the rescue, and then we have Toast, who is amazing. And he's like, He's like one of the largest pugs ever, not necessarily in weight, but like he's really tall and his back legs are taller than his front legs. And he's got a very protruded nose. He's super active. He like represents, I think, a lot of the things that I think where things should go. And I think it's really important to own dogs like this and to be public and to show them that you can be selective, like you can find ways to make this work. There are paths forward. And so anyways, I think again, like you said, looking at things objectively and then with the numbers and just understanding like what's really happening, how much people are spending, how many people are having to, give back dogs like even during COVID, how many dogs were then returned and in Austin, like just straight up tied to a pole outside of the Austin Animal Shelter, like no note, nothing, because they've realized like, oh, wow, I'm in over my head, or there's behavioral problems or all these things. So there's like the objective data, and then there's like solving all for that nuance, right? You take it for face value, and then you really have to sit and think how it's all connected. How are people making decisions? Because at the end of the day, it's like everything happens because humans are making these, a lot of times emotionally driven decisions, not really thinking pragmatically. It's a lot of it is emotion. And so it's like, how can we meet them there and better educate them to make, smarter decisions or build businesses cater to them? And I know this isn't what you asked, but this is kind of an important thing, I think, for me of why I got involved in this space was basically when so I'd been 10 years without going to the vet, going through that whole experience with the dog, taking Mappo to the vet for the first time. I was blown away that I felt like I was right back in like 2001. I was like, how has none of this process changed? How is it still a pain to get medical records? How is it like there's only these 3 food options? Like how come I'm not being educated about more things? Like titer testing, that's a whole nother subject. That was never brought up to me to my vet, after going back for annuals. Like all these things, like there's so many antiquated elements of dog ownership. And I think people get really stuck on the idea of pet food, which is super important, but there's been a lot of innovation in that space. I think it's super saturated where you have like a new celebrity every day putting their name on a bag, calling it, oh, there's another $100 million company, which fair enough. Like whatever, if whatever floats your boat, it's a free market. You could do that. But I think there's a lot more opportunity, vet care, wearables. There's just so many gear, things like that, supplements kind of in the food space, a little different. There's just so many other elements that I think are open for new players. And those are the things that I want to use these data and statistics to try and push people to think in that direction. People who are maybe outsiders of the pet industry, that aren't necessarily have been through all the bureaucratic process of what the pet industry is, or, just coming with a fresh perspective, because I think that's a great opportunity and it could change a lot of lives because pets are very special to us and they do a lot of things for us emotionally. And so I think that marriage and like uncovering those kind of business opportunities, that's something you could sustain a life. You could help enrich a dog's life and a dog owner's life, and that bond. I think that's like the thing that is what really makes me eager to continue to talk about these things.
I think Dogonomist is such an interesting newsletter because you really are talking to 2 audiences. One is like anybody in the pet brand space. Obviously, you want to keep up on what's happening. But I also think consumers and just pet parents would be interested in this as well. Like I'm just super interested in knowing like what's coming out, where the trends are. And, because to me, it's like, well, what does this mean I'll be able to offer my dog in the next couple of years as these new things come out? So I think it's super fun to read along and follow along everything that you're writing about. So is there anything that we didn't get to ask you that you wanted to talk about?
I guess I'll piggyback off of what I had just mentioned. So speaking about like the trends and the products, I think some of the things I'm really excited about, or what I would like to see in the space, and maybe one day I'll work on it. So pet wearables, I think, is super, super exciting. I think there's a lot of interesting players. We have Whoop bands, Fit, Oura Ring, like all these things, Apple Watch, that I think are great at identifying, preventing, like, hey, you slept really crappy. You need to change something. Your recovery is not great. Or like, I have friends that are able to predict when they're going to get sick because of all their biometric markers. And like on cue, they get sick, So I think things like that are super, super amazing. And I think that space is advancing very quickly. I think it's still lacking in accuracy. I think there's things that are interesting about it. Like, I don't know about you guys, but like when my dogs are in the house, they don't wear collars. So it's like, they're with me all the time. I work from home. So it's like, I don't really, it's more of a safety thing for me, like getting snagged on something or whatever. I was only when we're out and about is when I use them. So I think pet wearables has a lot of room to grow and a lot of room for new ways to track those things, which kind of feeds me into what I am really excited about. And this is a little bit more nerdy, futuristic, which is like dog dashboards. And essentially what I mean by that is like, you could see everything passively about your dog, right? When the next vet visit is, it has all the info plugged in, what you feed your dog, like when you need to give it, heartworm, whatever, like all these things, right? And you could plug in wearables. So it's like this living, breathing dashboard, how much you spent. And then you get fed like, oh, so-and-so is running a discount, or you could switch up proteins from this company, blah, blah, blah. So it's like basically this AI integrated dashboard that you could both passively and actively manage your dog's lifestyle, not only from a health perspective, but also from a financial perspective. Because like I said, a lot of people don't know the finances. And a lot of it's like, when a big vet emergency bill comes, that's when they start realizing how much they're having to spend. Right. And so I think that's super interesting. Like having some kind of Alex and I call it a dog dashboard. I think that's super exciting. That's something that's going to happen. I think going along those lines and getting more specific with breeds, I think breed specific supplements is an interesting category, or like, snub nosed dogs, like dogs that are brachycephalic that need these things a little bit more than other dogs, or bird dogs, or, it could be mutts. Like, I think that marketing and the idea of really starting to tailor supplements specifically to dog type, I think is a very interesting category, because right now dog supplements are also massive and it's a lot of the same ingredients, and they're like, oh, it's vet verified by so and so and so and so, and it's like it's all the same stuff. I get it from a marketing perspective, but I'm like, let's go a step further and like let's really make it for a specific subset and a niche. And I think the LTV of somebody who feels like their dog has a very specific thing just for them, and it works, right? It has to work, I think is super interesting. And then a few more is Loyal. So the anti-aging pill for dogs. I think it's super, super, super interesting. I don't know how I feel about like giving my dog a pill and it lives longer. I love the idea. Like, I think it's a good thing ultimately. It's just a weird thought of it, right? It's like, it feels like, I don't know, like idiocracy, or it feels like this thing that like shouldn't be real, but is on the cusp of being very, very real. I think it's really amazing. I think it's having a lot of conversations about how we look at like cell regeneration or new cells being generated in dogs. So like science around dogs is just exploding. Like, so many research papers are coming out daily about dogs, which I think is super, super cool. And so I think companies like that are looking to try and push the boundaries of science with dogs is super amazing and very exciting to watch. And I'm very curious how this plays out, which makes me think about at-home testing. So you have Oncotect that does the world's first screening of cancer that literally can be detected through urine. And so I think a lot of making things more affordable and accessible at home, not having to go into the vet for every little thing, having a conversation, having to pay for that vet visit, your dog is terrified, like all these things, right, that make it really difficult at times to maybe do what's best for your dog or have peace of mind. And so I think at-home testing is super great. Cheaper, tighter tests, things like that, so we can actually see if our dogs have antibodies against a particular disease or virus, and we don't need to necessarily do another vaccine. Educating people on that, and I think just that advanced care, preventative care that you could take at home measures is super important. And then the last thing I would say, which is not really talked about, but I only experience this because it's happens a lot in pitties, is Mappo has like environmental allergies. We did get him Cytopoint in the very beginning because it was just really, really bad. But through a lot of diet changes and adding salmon oil and things of that to his diet, his scratching and inflammation has gone. I haven't given him Cytopoint shot. He just turned 4 yesterday, and I haven't given him a Cytopoint shot in like over 2 years. It's manageable, but he still has like a lot of like clearly his paws. And it's a lot of environmental. Like sometimes he doesn't, like he'll run around in grass and it's just whatever. All that to say is like finding allergy testing. There's like one person I feel like in the state of Texas, like what someone's told me essentially, like within like a reasonable distance from me could do the allergy testing. And then like the wait for that is forever and it's super expensive. So I think it's a very niche market, but it is one of the most common issues with dogs is allergy and skin issues. And I think if we could identify some of those things that are causing that and be more informed, I think again, it's like, we don't have to go into overconsumption mode, buy a ton of supplements, try a bunch of different foods and just be guessing, I think it's just like, let's find out at the source, like what is going on. But yeah, I would say that kind of rounds it out for me and what I'm excited to watch over the next, 5 to 7 years.
I think there's so much innovation that's happening in the space, and you touched on a lot of it. I think like for anybody who's listening to this podcast, definitely subscribe to Dogonomist. And of course, I'm also going to plug Juniper because we're talking about a lot of this too. We're working with a lot of these products and teams to get the word out about these things that are launching all the time for your pets. And then also really writing about like how to decide what's right for you, right? It almost feels like overwhelming to think about all of this coming out for pets in the next couple of years. So, but overall, super exciting to see this stuff. And Dogonomist is personally like one of my favorite newsletters in the pet space. I will read every issue that comes out. So I'm super excited to tell other people about it as well. So yeah, if you're listening, please subscribe. And Collin, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you all. I had a blast. I loved it.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Juniper podcast. Don't forget to sign up at juniperpet.co for guides, articles, and newsletters that make pet parenting easier. And if you're a pet brand looking for creative content that connects, drop us a line at juniperpet.co. We'll see you next time.